Welcome back to Charmy Bee Reads Chapter 18 of The Walking Dead Hope. I'm Charmy Bee. Let's continue where we left off. Maybe he should have felt the baby kick. He hoped Clem wasn't too disappointed. It's just, he didn't think he deserved to be the first to experience something so remarkable. Clem and Louis were pieces of the puzzle, and over time, it seemed that he didn't fit with them. It felt almost like he didn't belong anymore. Before he delved further into his thoughts, he bumped into someone's back. He stood up to apologize and looked up at Gabe standing over him. The man helped AJ up, smiling down at him. "Going somewhere, buddy?" he asked, his tone cheery. AJ raised his eyebrow, eyeing Gabe up and down. He was wearing a haphazardly straightened shirt, a pair of tight jeans, and his gun holster on his belly. AJ searched for the reason for him being there, and came empty. Excuse me. "I was, going to the bathroom," he mumbled, seeing the door a few paces down the hall. Gabe crossed his arms, nodding. "You okay, man?" he asked. "You seem a bit shaken." "I don't know," admitted AJ, shrugging. An idea popped into his head, and that moment, he looked up at Gabe and tilted his head. "You had a sister? You had a sister, didn't you?" Taken aback by the question, Gabe opened his mouth, but no words came out. AJ stared as Gabriel blinked a few times and mumbled something in Spanish. By the tone of it, AJ gathered it wasn't pleasant. "I did," Gabe said bitterly, closing his eyes. "Why do you ask?" Did you love her?" "Of course I did," Gabe said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "We fought every now and then, but at the end of the day, we loved each other." "What about your parents?" AJ asked, unable to stop the questions from flowing. "Did they love her more than you?" Gabe frowned at the question, seeming racking his brain for answers. "I guess he did," Gabe guessed, shrugging. "A new baby is always a joy. It's always a joy for everyone in the family, except for their siblings. I remember Mara used to get the best toys when we were younger." He reminisced with a smile. "What's this about anyway?" Gabe asked, leaning against the wall. AJ opened his mouth to answer, but it was interrupted by Louis's hand on his shoulder. He turned and looked up to his adopted father, who wore a concerned expression. "You okay, AJ?" he asked, kneeling to his level. "Something the matter?" AJ shook his head. "Nope, I'm fine," he assured the man. "Thank you, though." Louis nodded at the boy and looked up at Gabe. "Everything okay?" he asked briskly, pursing his lips. "Just peachy," Gabe replied, shrugging. The freckled man eyed him curiously for a moment before leading AJ back to the office. AJ looked back at Gabe before entering. The man gave him a slow wink. Clem asked the same questions as Louis, and AJ gave the same answer. She looked him up and down and nodded. "Don't run off like that, all right?" she said. "I won't," he promised with a smirk, winking up at Louis. The trio went back to their room and... Oh, man, sorry, I got a tickle in my throat. Anyway, where was I? The trio went back to their room in fervent conversation, whatever that word means, discussing more possible names. Among the bunch, Louis suggested Kyla and Michael as the new possibilities. Clem unfortunately dismissed him with a chuckle. As it got to their room, they bid AJ goodnight. Clem kneeled down and kissed him profusely on the cheek, leaving him flustered. "Clem, get off," he complained, closing his eyes. "Can't help it," she claimed, showing his face in kisses. "I've got this new motherly instinct now. You gotta get used to it." He fought her off, a smile creeping in his lips. Despite himself, the boy gave Louis a hug and opened his door. "I love you guys," he said, shuffling his feet. "And we love you more, goofball," Clem said, blowing him another kiss. He smiled back at her, and as he closed the door behind him, Louis and Clem walked to their bed, and he helped lay her down. He helped her lay down, holding an arm out to her. When she complained, he raised his hand. "No buts." "No buts. I promised Eleanor you'd be extra careful," he said. "When did she ask you this?" she inquired, raising an eyebrow. She unblocked her belt and wiggled out of her jeans, revealing a comfort out of her linen bedspread. "About 5 minutes after she told you for the first time," he said with a shrug. "Needless to say, she didn't trust you'd follow her advice. Clem scoffed, but couldn't find it in her to deny it. Louis took off his coat and shirt, placing them neatly on the chair beside the bed. He lay back on it, taking hold of her outstretched hand and slowly stroking her palm with his thumb. The couple looked up at the ceiling in silence, basking in each other's company. Soon the sun had finally set, drowning them in near darkness. As his head rested propped over his right hand, his left hand sought Clementine's stomach. Clem noticed his advances and took his hand, suppressing a giggle and guiding it in the right direction. Her belly was already taken shape. His fingers caressed it gently, making her hum contentedly. With some effort, she rolled toward him. She placed her hand over his heart like she did every night. Its steady thumping soothed her. She leaned in and placed a soft kiss on his cheek. "Good night, honey. Sleep well, Clem," he whispered, his eyes already droopy from exhaustion. "Just 3 more months, huh?" "Won't be long now," she agreed, covering his hands with hers. She stifled a yawn. "It's gonna be amazing," Clem breathed as sleep overtook her. After that, the weeks flew by in a haze. Their days consisted mostly of regular checkups and some mingling with the Richmond community. Clem, for one, was grateful that she didn't have to interact with Lizzie another minute. Before she realized 2 months had passed, and she and Louis were in their room getting some rest before their final trip to the school. According to Eleanor, being almost 8 months pregnant meant she wouldn't be able to travel at all soon. Her feet already hurt every day. She woke up at odd times of the night craving foods they couldn't procure and pounding when she realized it. To say the least, she was glad it was almost over. As she closed her eyes, she was plunged into darkness and thrown into yet another dream. Though this one was different than the rest. Her eyes flickered open, a sudden light from an afternoon sun momently blinding her. She looked around as her eyes adjusted to the brightness. A meadow extended in front of her as far as the eye could see. A small number of trees were scattered across the field, their leaves bright orange. The grass around her was oddly green, barely any of it shorter than an inch in height. Birds chirped overhead, making her look up. They flew through a bright blue sky streaked with small white puffy clouds. The scene was almost pulled out of the dark drawing. She thought with a smile. A small animal brushed its fur on her ankles, and it was then that she realized she was barefoot. Her usually grime-covered jacket had been replaced with a bright orange blouse. She wore tight denim jeans, and a quick inspection of her head told her she still had her hat. Her hands quickly drifted to her abdomen, but something was amiss. Her previously large belly was flat. She looked around frantically, as if it had somehow walked away from her. A whistle came from somewhere behind her, and she turned. A picnic table had been set in the middle of the clearing, 5 plates of food on it. Sitting at the head of the table was Louis, wearing his signature trench coat. He beckoned her over, waving an arm at her. She did as he said, slowly approaching the table. As she neared it, she spotted AJ sitting on Louis's right. He was wearing a science dog sweater and a pair of jeans. Unlike their usual state, his clothes weren't matted with dirt and grime either. When did he grow up so much? She thought curiously. The boy absently plunged his fork into the steak on a plate, earning a stern look from Louis. "You gotta wait for Clem, little dude," he chastised. AJ rolled his eyes but obeyed, setting down the fork. It was only when Clementine arrived at the table and she saw a third person sitting on a high chair on Louis's left. She had a curly brown hair going down to her shoulders, 2 pink bows on either side of her head. Her eyes were a deep hazel, inspecting everything on sight. The array of freckles on her cheeks put Louis to shame extended all the way down her collarbone and beneath her tiny yellow dress. And this is where we'll stop for part 2. Stay tuned for part 3 of Charmy Bee Reads Chapter 18 of The Walking Dead Hope.